Hi, my name is Mark Cousins. I'm a filmmaker. This is me aged about 13. That's 43 years ago. I look out at you. There's me in my yellow tie. This is in Sligo. I think I'd just seen Grease, the movie, and that's why I've got this collar of my fake leather jacket turned up. I've made a film called The Story of Looking, and I wrote a book called The Story of Looking. And this wee boy you're looking at, this young man, was obsessed by looking then, and I still am. I wasn't good at reading or words at school, but I loved looking, the visual world. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the visual world. One of the places that really introduced me to looking, inspired me to look, was the Ulster Museum. I was brought up in Belfast and Antrim, and I went to the Ulster Museum a lot. And like many children, the first thing I really remembered there, the most striking thing I saw was her, the mummy, Takabuti. This picture's taken sort of at the eye level of a child, and I remember going there probably first when I was about big enough to peer over the top of her coffin sarcophagus and see her face. This was the 1970s in Belfast. Of course, the Troubles were on, and people were tarred and feathered. You know, terrible things happened to them. People put tar on their heads. And I remember looking at her and thinking, she's been tarred. Look at the blackness of her face. I remember looking at her hair and thinking, she's got ginger hair like my family's got ginger hair. It looks like a wig it's been put on just yesterday. It wasn't too shocking to see her, to be honest. In Ireland, and of course, we don't hide dead bodies as much, unlike other cultures, some other cultures, we're not scared of looking at open coffins and Irish wakes and all that. In fact, I remember as a kid, you used to knock on the door and say, "Is this where the dead man lives?" And you'd come in and you'd peep over the edge of the coffin and see a face, not like this exactly, but you saw dead bodies. And of course, we saw dead bodies in the news as well. And around this time, I remember it was the time of the video nasty era and horror movies like The Exorcist. And probably before I should have done so, I saw The Exorcist. And I saw, a kind of horrible Gothic worldview. And I suppose the Gothic worldview of The Exorcist and this kind of Gothic image seared in my head. And that's how imagery works, even though this is Egypt and ancient times, and The Exorcist was America and Belfast was real world for us, 1970. All these different images of death or deformed faces all seared in my mind. And now when I look back at an image like this and remember seeing it, I think to myself, I learnt to look at scary stuff. I learnt to look at scary stuff. But also in the Ulster Museum, my next choice is something like this. There's a painting by Maurice Louis called Golden Age. I think it's from 1958 or something like this. This picture is huge if you've seen it. And I remember when I first saw it, I was in my teens again. I walked closer and closer to it, so it filled my field of vision. And it felt to me like walking in a forest, or the way that Donegal fills your field of vision. But it struck me even at a relatively young age, that this was abstract or modern. I don't even know if I would use those words, but it was modern. It had symmetry, like the Catholic altar had symmetry, like the Mass had symmetry. And all these things, again, were formative ways of seeing for me the idea of modernism, the idea of abstraction, and the idea of being overwhelmed by something visually. So this picture was an important step on my way to knowing something more about the visual world. But of course it was American, or at least I thought it was American. I didn't think that modernism could be an Irish thing. This is me about the age of 17, soon after I'd seen Maurice Louis, I was beginning to understand the world aesthetics a bit. Looking out at us now, I think, look at those eyes, how hungry they are for visual ideas, visual things. And that hunger was again fed by the Ulster Museum with this particular painting. Louis de Brocque's James Joyce picture. Look at Joyce's eyes, or one eye almost. Joyce, of course, I knew by then had real problems with his eyes. He was going blind in his eyes, and this fascinated me. I'd read some James Joyce, I'd read Portrait of the Artist, and I was so attracted by his passion, his churning passion. And when I look at this picture now, it looks to me as if that's a whirlpool in the sea, the churning waves almost. But what I loved is that this picture told me that Ireland had modernism too. This isn't a standard picture. This is isn't a realistic picture. It's a modernist picture. And I loved the fact that where I came from, Ireland, the north and the south, could be modernist too. And talking of modernism, of course, Irish modernism, here was the outside, the exterior of the Ulster Museum. And I just loved it. I hadn't been taught architecture, but I looked over to the right and saw this sort of classical stuff with its Doric columns and things. And then this extrusion to the left, it looked as if the building was halfway through a transition into like a kind of Star Wars fighter or a concrete. It looked in some ways like the Giant's Causeway. That sounds weird. I know now that this was a redesign of the older classical building by Francis Pym. I think it was done in 1962. But again, here was modernism, and again, here was massing. And at that stage, I just fell in love with architecture. I actually wanted to be an architect. Many filmmakers, I think, for them, the road not taken is architecture. And I couldn't get enough of this. I planned to study architecture, but then didn't. But it was this facade, I think, that taught me about modernism. I've since travelled many countries across America and Finland and France and Germany to see the modernist buildings of people like, Frank Lloyd Wright isn't really a modernist, but Alvar Aalto, Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, etc. But I think my taste started here. And it continued here. This isn't in the Ulster Museum. This is a piece of furniture by the great Irish modernist designer, furniture designer, lacquerist, architect, Eileen Gray. Look at it. It so reminds me of the Ulster Museum, but also it reminds me of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. And, years later in my life now that I've travelled a lot, I've been to New York, I think 50 times, but each time I see the Guggenheim, I think of this, which my brain then skips, my kind of visual cortex, you could say, skips from New York to the Ulster Museum. And here's Eileen Gray looking not very cheery, I have to say, but over the years I've also become a passionate feminist, and I've been very interested in women in architecture and film and painting and other things. And it's important to acknowledge that what she did, how she thought in the 1920s and 30s onwards, she lived a long time, and how she really helped rethink Irish visual culture. The next object in the Ulster Museum that influenced me visually is this. We're going way back in time again. This is from the Bronze Age, and they think it's a dress fastener. So if you had a tunic with 2 buttonholes in the front, this, I guess, would have gone through and held your tunic or your dress together. I remember seeing it back then when I was a child or a teenager, and liking the simplicity of it. Again, I guess I had an eye for a kind of design, or you look at the symmetry. This is not a million miles away visually from Maurice Louis' Golden Age picture. But there's a specific reason why I mention it here, is because later on when I became a filmmaker, I made this film. It's called I Am Belfast. And if you look over on the right there, there's the great Irish actress, Northern Irish actress, Helena Barrine. And if you just peer into her hair, you can see that she's wearing one of those dress fasteners. Not the exact one, of course, because we didn't nick it from the Ulster Museum, but we had our design department copy it and remake it. I wanted to film her the back of her head a lot, and I wanted something that felt ancient and Irish, and that thing came from Tyrone. And so I wanted to connect her back to some elemental past. But it strikes me as I look at this image also that, look, there's the big, that salt hill behind her was down at the docks in Belfast, but it also reminds me of something big and abstract like the Maurice Louis picture. It's me today. This is soon after, not long after I made I Am Belfast. An older man now with greying hair a little bit and bushier eyebrows, and but look, the eyes are still hungry, do you think? I think when I look at myself now, I still feel as if that hunger for imagery that I felt when I walked around the Ulster Museum as a lad, I still feel it. Weirdly, you can see I've got some tattoos now. That one says Forough, she was a great Iranian feminist. Orson Welles below that, Paul Cézanne below that. Behind me there's a picture of Caravaggio, and behind on my, that's to the left there, and on the right there's a John Cassavetes picture. I'm surrounded by imagery, aren't I? And I guess that has been, as I said before, the thing that has kept me going, my passion, and it was launched in part at the Ulster Museum. Now in my 50s, I'm as hungry for imagery as I've ever been. And as if to prove the point, I went on to the website of the Ulster Museum recently, and I discovered for the first time these photographs. Look at this one. The next three pictures, the last pictures I'll use, are by Philip Woods. He was in Northern Ireland just in 76 and 1977, I think. He was on a Kodak bursary scheme. He was from the London College of Printing. What I love is about his pictures they're mostly photographs of women and children. So many of the photographs in those days are from soldiers and rioters, and it's often men, young men. It's like history and society in Northern Ireland and Belfast then was made by men, but in fact, of course, it wasn't. The strongest people in my life were women. And look at this image, mostly women. Look at the bottom centre, that woman in the blue headscarf looking down. And just to her up and left, there's a woman with a purple headscarf and kind of orange rosette. A lot of people are looking down here. Are they praying for a moment? This was one of the famous peace marches, of course, which was led by women. And we were on those peace marches, and my mum took me and my brother, and they're just so memorable. And it's the beauty of this frame, and look at the way Woods has caught the light. If you lift your eyes up, you'll see that the sun is probably setting here. It looks like a cold day. Everybody's got hats and coats on. So what is this? Like a November day at 5 p.m. or something, and the women from the Ardoyne and the Shankill, and some men too, are there in a kind of forlorn, silent protest. Beautiful image. And talking about beautiful image, look at this one of children. Wow. You know, he's probably used a flash. Has he used a flash to get the foreground so bright? And of course, those two in the bottom left are out of focus. But look at the wee one in the back with the green jumper and his eyes closed. I'm sure Philip Woods, the photographer, has asked the children to pretend they're asleep or something. But isn't it wonderful, the sense of them all here in this tiny van, and you can see outside the typical buildings of the time. That's where the sort of house that my granny lived in childhood and dreaming. I think that, you know, there's always a kind of dreamlike quality to imagery, and this is very much a dreamlike image. It's, if you've seen any of the films of Jane Campion, particularly one called Sweetie, this could be by her. And this is my final image, also again by Philip Woods. And again, I love it. 5 women, all of whom could be my granny. Where to start? Look at the woman on the left with the black boots sitting down. She's singing something. Her hands are on her lap. Behind her it says, "Okay, Grammar." What does that mean on that sign? You move your eyes round. There's a woman with a sort of slightly 70s colour, so she's slightly younger and trying to be more trendy. But the woman next to her in the big coat sitting down, she's not trying to be trendy. She's got the glasses from the 1950s and her wee padded boots to keep her feet warm. My granny had those. I said 5 women, but they're actually 6 because you can see the legs of that woman if you move your eye further around. And then one standing and singing. What could she be singing? And if we move our eye to the final woman who's surmounted by a bee painting on the wall, she's turning her head away. So is she disapproving of the song. The bee makes me feel that this is a school, and maybe this is a club for what would have been called OAPs now or something. I don't know, a reminiscence club. But it's wonderful image. And I'm so glad to have discovered the work of Philip Woods. I found one more image of me, this one, which is very weird and scratched. This is me after I left Northern Ireland, came to live here in Edinburgh. Shaved my head, but that kind of scratchy feeling, this feels to me what it's like to look into the past, to the visual influencers, the kind of earliest images in my inner eye, that became a kind of photo library. So I'm very grateful to the Ulster Museum for providing me with this kind of incubator, this place, this fertile place where I could learn to look. And if you care to see my film, The Story of Looking, or read the book, I'd be delighted. Thanks for your time. Bye.